Welcome back to Cricket Central, the podcast where we discuss all the big stories and many small ones. I'm here with all four of us again this week, Ethan, Navod and Pearson. How are you all? I heard that there's a share house being discussed between Navod and Pearson, and I do hope that all the people in that share house are cricket fans, because I do would feel a bit sorry for them otherwise. But holidays going well for both of you guys?
Yeah, holidays are going fine. But I'd head off to England in a week, so I'll be missing a few of the next podcasts. Sorry to everyone who only listens to hear me, which is probably most of the podcast. But anyway, so that's
Zoom doesn't work.
up.
Zoom doesn't work in England, or
Well, I'm not sure when I'll have the time.
DRS that doesn't
particularly
work
with time frames, I think it'll be a bit of a difficulty. And going off a vein that we've said quite a few times on this podcast, it's easier to watch English cricket here than it will be for me to watch English cricket in England. So whether I'll be able to watch enough to comment's another question. On the share house, yeah, hopefully everything sorts itself out. Perhaps we'll have to see who views the podcast the most to pick our third member. Might be an effective strategy.
yeah, we can get a bit of a competition going. That'd be good. And what have you been up to, Ethan?
Oh, nothing much. I slept till about 4 p.m. today, so I missed the first part of the cricket. But I caught up.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Uncharacteristic. I would expect that more from the right side of my screen here. But
yeah, that makes me feel less guilty about my life decisions. I'm quite happy with that.
Anyway, we've got plenty to discuss today. Pearson's told me we have to talk more about England, even though we covered it a lot last week. We have to cover off their whitewash of New Zealand, and well and truly the resurgence of their Test team with Baz Ball being their new style. But to start off with, we've reached the final stages of the marathon Australian tour of Sri Lanka, it seems. We had 3 T20s, 5 ODIs, and now the first test down in the picturesque Gaul today. Beautiful scenes down there, perfect skies, a great atmosphere. Did feel a bit like we were going back to the 90s at some points with some of the music there. We had a lot of Michael Jackson, even some Cold Chisel for a stage there. I was very much enjoying it. It was a very interesting day's cricket. You would probably have to say, with Sri Lanka getting all out for 212, with Nathan Lying 5 for 90, being the star performer on a real dust bowl of a pitch where spin is really the main way of getting wickets. And then Australia looked pretty comfortable early on. Khawaja and Warner really taking it to their bowlers, trying to put pressure back on and doing it successfully for a while. But then a couple of interesting dismissals, one particular with Steve Smith, we'll talk about in a bit, which was very unfortunate, a run out there. Left Australia 3 for 98, so still in a pretty good position, but Sri Lanka by no means out of it at all. I'll go to you, Navod, first. How did you see, the day's play in general from both sides? Where do you see the game at the moment?
Yeah, it was a good day of Test cricket. Probably more in favour of Australia at the end of that, at the end of our innings. But then they made a few errors, bit of careless errors, really. That sort of shifted the game. I think that's why we all love Test cricket so much. You can just change with the snap of a finger. So overall, quite an eventful day of cricket. A lot of wickets that fell. Spin was definitely the key. I know that the pace bowlers Mitchell Starc and Cummins both took a wicket each, but spin was definitely the go-to here today. There were lots and lots of turn from all the spinners, not just Australia, not just Sri Lanka. So it was very interesting to see. I thought maybe the Sri Lankan batting wasn't the best. It's definitely been better in the past against different sides, that's for sure. And also our bowling has been a little bit off. Ramesh Mendes has done really well, at least today. And Lasith Embaldania was, usually he's quite good, but he was just seemed a bit off today, which was a bit weird. And we've had Jeffrey Van der Say debut today, and I thought he did quite well. He only bowled 3 overs, so can't really say much now. But yeah, I thought he did quite well for his 3 that he bowled.
Yeah, and Ethan, from Australia's side of things with the bowling, I thought the first hour or so was pretty interesting. Sri Lanka was holding on fairly well, lost a couple of wickets, but I thought the wicket of Karunaratne by Lyon there, I think they were about 2 for 74 at that stage. That was really key. And then from then onwards, Lyon sort of gained the ascendancy, and Swepson chipped in with 3 wickets as well, I think. So how do you think Swepson's shown himself to be able to do this consistently, and just more generally our bowling attack? How do you think it fared today?
I thought it was a pretty solid performance all around. I mean, we got what we wanted with the quicks getting overs up front, each taking a wicket each, and that set the platform for our spinners against the middle order. I thought Lyon bowled very well. He got the right mix of flight, drift, and turn, and he looked very threatening the bulk of the time. I think Swepson was good as well. I think probably you'd say maybe 4 balls and over looks, genuinely threatening, but there's still some control issues that we need to iron out. I mean, at the end of the day, it's an economy of 4.23, which you can excuse for a leg spinner, but I think control is still the main thing there. That being said, there were 3 very good wickets, and certainly the first 2 he got in successive deliveries impressed me. They drifted into the right-hander and got considerable turn, and it was a good bit of keeping as well. So I think overall, I think you give it the Australia's bowling attack a big tick there, rolling Sri Lanka for 212 in a country where first innings is your opportunity to get a big score in a big league. And hats off to the fielders as well. I think everyone was sort of on song, the right intensity, and there was plenty of half chances, but I reckon you'd say the bulk of the half chances, sort of went our way, and even the ones we missed, there was alertness and effort there. So big tick with Australia's bowling performance. Yeah,
you talk about the catches. Warner with 2 absolute speckies, and Khawaja a very nice one as well. And yes, the 28th 5 for Nathan Lyon, and back at the place where I think he played his first test as well. So definitely happy hunting grounds for him. Just finally for Sri Lanka, another good performance by Dick Weller. Still not quite able to break the century mark, but a very important 58 for Sri Lanka there, and seemed to be the only player to really try and put the pressure back on Australia by being a bit more aggressive, Navon.
Yeah, he was, very aggressive innings from Dick Weller. I actually really liked it. After we lost those quick wickets by Swepson and Lyon, Dick Weller was in, and he definitely put the pedal down and got some quick runs. It was really good. I think Pearson mentioned this once. It was almost Bairstow-esque, like he was going really fast. So, and it wasn't there weren't any really risky shots. I think it was all quite calculated. I mean, obviously there's some risk to going that fast in test, a lot of sweeps, but I think he played really good innings. Definitely pulled us out of the mud when we were really low with runs, and we had lost a lot of wickets. So he definitely helped us get to 212. It's probably not the highest total or the best total I would have hoped for, but it's certainly something for our bowlers to defend for.
And then with Australia's batting, we were none for 47 off 9 overs, and absolutely rocketing along, really not looking like getting out at all. But then Ramesh Mendis, a beautiful ball that sort of went straight on to get Warner. And then from then onwards, things were a bit more difficult for the Australians. Labuschagne reverse sweep basically got himself out. And then obviously Steve Smith and Khawaja just having a huge mix-up in the middle of the pitch. I would probably say Khawaja absolutely sold out Smith there and should probably never play again after doing that to Smudge. You've had a few good matches, Khawaja, but you're up against the second greatest after Don Bradman, averages around 60. If he calls you through for a run, you go through for the run. If you're Usman Khawaja there, so very disappointing there. But Ethan, how did you rate our batting?
thought it was solid to start off with. As you mentioned, 47 off the first 9 overs. There was the intent there that I was looking for, and I think with the way Dick Weller batted, that's probably a good method to go down on this deck. But I did feel a large sense of disappointment at those wickets in the middle. Now, after you work hard with the ball and worked hard in the field, you couldn't help but say Australia threw a couple away there, and we probably need to hit 300 plus to be in a good position in this game. And it's made a lot harder by Labuschagne and Smith falling in quick succession towards the end of the day. What I will say is Khawaja, he got a bit lucky as well, but he looks comfortable against the spin for the large part. And there is a lot of turn, and the bowlers are pretty decent, but you sort of back his technique, even though he has been given a couple of lives. I think there's question marks over our remaining batsmen, though, particularly Head and Green against the spin. So I'm certainly going to look for a little bit of more of intent from those two. I think the people who have succeeded on this wicket, being Khawaja and Dick Weller, have used the sweep really well. So I think the next most likely person to exploit that's probably Alex Carey. So I'm hoping he can chip in down the order, and then Australia can work their way up to a 300, but they can't keep throwing away wickets like they did at the back end of the day.
And Pearson Khawaja really just kept going where he left off in Pakistan. Unbelievable form, especially against spin. It's just effortless how he plays. Surely you've got to say he's the best player of spin in the world at the moment. I know there's another upstart in England called Joe Root who likes to think he's all right, but the way Khawaja's batting, I think he has to take that crown, surely.
I was actually going to say that he's the second best player of spin to Joe Root, and I think that is definitely still the case. I wouldn't really try and push competition here. I think Root is undeniably the more complete batsman. I think he has a wider range of shots, but I would say that I think your trend about sweeping is definitely bang on the money. I'd note England, of course, have been to Sri Lanka twice in the last 4 years and whitewashed them both times. And we scored the vast majority of our runs through sweeping and reverse sweeping. Our most successful batsmen on those pitches were Joe Root and probably, I think you'd say, Keaton Jennings, both of whom are renowned for the way that they, A, pick length early, and B, are eager to sweep. I think there was a good graphic shown actually on the dismissal of Angela Matthews in one of the third man things that they do, in which they showed that for the first 5 balls of the over, he came forward to line and played it quite comfortably. And for the 6th ball, at a pretty much the exact same length as the other 5, went back and flicked it to what I think was a leg slip position. So I think what you do see a lot is, particularly on a minefield like we're seeing here, where arguably every wicket could go to spin here on out for the rest of the test, I think smothering the spin and playing off the front foot is going to be that safe route. And I think arguably, easily the best player in the Australian team and arguably best in the world is Khawaja at that. So I think if anyone will score runs, it's Khawaja. And if you're to win this series, it will need to be Khawaja that stands up and scores the bulk of the runs.
Yeah, well, he's definitely made a good start in that role today. Just before we go, we all agreed that Khawaja burnt Smith completely there?
He was primarily at fault. There was a little bit of Smith, but I think it was an 80-20 in Khawaja's favour for it being his fault.
I'd agree with that. I think Smith showed a bit of hesitation. Like he seemed to start the run, then sort of stop and then look at Khawaja. And then, he sort of kept running. Then Khawaja saw that the ball wasn't actually that far off and there wasn't really a single there. And then he just closed the door. So, I'd say that's mostly Khawaja's fault, but still a little bit of blame for Smith, I think. It's totally fair.
Ethan, we need your view.
Honestly, I'm just like cheekily happy that it was Smith who got run out and not Khawaja.
Oh, what? How dare you?
on these decks, I back in Uz. I'm very disappointed for Steve Smith, but next innings it is save the better batsman.
He was halfway down the pitch. You can't turn.
Oh yeah, it did just stop running.
Yeah, he just turned his back.
Randomly stopped running, but I think he realised he wasn't going to make it, and then you just got to protect the better batsman at that stage.
Well, lose a bit of weight and run a bit faster. That's the real issue for Khawaja. But Anyway, we should probably move on for that. 4 more days to go, and sure we've got plenty in store. The other big news, of course, was England finishing off New Zealand 3-0 victory in the series, winning the third test by 7 wickets. And really, there were very similar sort of themes in the third match as in the first two. New Zealand's had a really good first innings, 329 runs. Mitchell performing really well again, 109. Jack Leach, the star for England's bowling, with a 5 for there. And then they had England 6 for 55, which was, Pearson will be able to tell me, but at least one of the worst positions they had been in batting. I know there were a couple throughout the series actually, but again, very bad position. But then a 241 run partnership between Bairstow and Overton ended up giving England a 31 run lead. It was a truly remarkable day's cricket there. Bairstow finishing with 162, the second fastest 150 for England, I think, and Overton 97 on debut, which really put the match back into even pegging, I guess. And then New Zealand in the second innings, 326, Blundell 88 was the star. England required 296 and ended up doing it with absolute ease off just 54 overs. Bairstow added to the second fastest century he had from the second test, and second fastest 150, with the second fastest 50 for England. So truly remarkable series for him, ending up 394 runs at an average of 79, basically. I think his strike rate around 120 or something crazy like that. Really, as I say, really just shows England's ascendance in the series. What's your big takeaway from the series, Ethan?
Just check the rankings, and Johnny Bairstow's up to 21st. So
yes,
yeah,
he's coming. I told you, I never get these things wrong. You may like to claim I do, but I don't.
Up 20 places, wasn't it? I think up 20.
Yeah.
That's a huge movement.
He's on the charge. I think England just look like a team that's high on confidence and running with that confidence. I mean, the scores in the first 3 innings there were 360, 329, and 326, and England in the fourth innings managed to get to 296, just 3 down. And they, as you mentioned, they did it with ease, and I think they just have confidence that they can get it done in the fourth innings. That's the sort of 3 times in a row now, and I think this new culture with McCullum, Stokes, and Bazball is really bringing the best out of some players on these decks. And even we saw with the way Stokes used Jack Leach. I mean, it was a player, but when you treat him wrong, he has an Australia series where he's utterly useless. And he was brought on to open the bowling in the second innings there, and you sort of sensed he was in for a big performance, and he ended up with 10 for and man of the match there. So I think the real thing that's instigating England's success is just an environment that fills the players with confidence. And personally, heading into the fourth innings of each match, I certainly back them to chase 300 fairly comfortably, and I think they do too, with their intent to bring the game to the opposition, and it's paid dividends so far.
Yeah, Pearson, the big thing that I took from the series was really just the incredible turnaround from the Ashes, not just in the result, obviously, but just in key moments of the series, where in the Ashes you lost basically all of those moments. You seem to win them here, and even in situations where New Zealand were in pretty good positions, you were able to just take the game away from them completely.
Yeah, I think the basic difference you can see, well, beyond the more aggressive style and the like, I think the main thing you can probably tell off of this series is the previous regime had a tendency to let games drift. If you had one poor session, that often turned into 2 or 3 consecutive poor sessions. I don't think there was any point this series where England had back-to-back poor sessions. I think it was the middle session of day 1 that New Zealand were quite superb, and they did the same thing again on what I think was the morning of day 4 perhaps, or evening of day 3, where they performed well both times, being Mitchell and Blundell. And you thought, as is often the way with England, they might keep going, they might take a score that would take England out of the game, but it didn't happen. Same thing happened when we collapsed to 55 for 6, which was not the only collapse of the series. We did have that one collapse when we were all out for 141 in the first test, although that went under the radar because, of course, New Zealand only had 132. But again, in both of those situations, there was a fight back following that. So I think that's definitely the change. It's not purely the winning the key moments. It's a case of when you lose the key moments, immediately coming back. I mean, it is worth noting we did come up against quite possibly the best individual batting performance ever on English shores in a 3-test series. There is no player in history to score more runs in a 3-test series in England than Daryl Mitchell did in this series. He scored over 500 runs. No one else has ever done that.
Yeah, I was just looking through the batting, the amount of runs each batsman had, and 538 stuck out. Unbelievable. I thought it was a mistake at some point. It's unbelievable.
Yes, he scored a lot more than anyone else. And then you look at him and Blundell were a remarkable partnership. 23% of all deliveries faced by both sides in the series were during partnerships between Mitchell and Blundell. You don't get one partnership across an entire series facing over a fifth of the deliveries. That's not normal. So the idea, arguably the biggest bonus for England, is the fact that they could work around New Zealand's 2 top players and still perform. I think you go back to last year, if we'd been set 250, you'd have thought we'd have lost probably at the end of day 4 in the case of the most recent test, and we'd be bundled out probably for 120, 130 in most games. I know pretty much every England fan thought we'd lose chasing 70 against Sri Lanka early last year when we were about 30 for 3. Everyone thought that was going to go horribly wrong. We're now in a situation where 3 tests have gone by and you set England 290 and just no one bats an eye. I mean, this is the first side to chase 250 or above in 3 consecutive innings ever. So this isn't a normal thing. So hopefully this is the start of some revolution in the way England play Test cricket, and this form can continue and the momentum wins us this test on Friday against India.
Well, you say a revolution in the way England play cricket. Navod, do you think this could potentially cause some kind of change in the way all teams go about playing Test cricket, in the way that they take the game on, and just sort of the priorities when you're batting?
Yeah, definitely. I think for now, England's really mastered that 4th innings sort of chase of runs. And I think there could be definitely a change where other teams realize, it's not always impossible to chase such a large total in that last innings. So yeah, definitely, I can definitely see a lot of teams catching up after what we've seen with England and their ability to chase such large 4th innings total. It's really something special. I don't really like to say that. It gives me no pleasure to say that, but yeah, it's been quite remarkable watching them play. Actually, it has to be said. Yeah, I think teams and countries will definitely try and learn, and this might even put us into a new era of Test cricket where that 4th innings becomes almost like a little bit like white ball. I know Bairstow was striking at 120, and there was some ridiculous stat where he had a higher strike rate than some players in the IPL, like Virat Kohli.
I'll clarify.
Not just some players.
Bairstow scored more runs at a higher strike rate than Kane Williamson, Virat Kohli, and Rohit Sharma all did in the IPL. Not bad that for a Test batsman.
Yeah, so there you go. Like I reckon there might be a shift in the tide, if you might say, with some teams really taking on the bowlers in that 4th innings and really putting the pedal down. Yeah.
But Ethan, it is a bit reliant on having the pitch to be able to do it on, like having an England pitch where the ball does come onto the bat. There's not much there for spin, and in comparison to some pitches in Asia where it's a lot slower, the ball doesn't come onto the bat, or even in Australia where sort of there's a lot of value for getting in on the pitch and sort of going slow at the start and then capitalizing later on in your innings. I don't see that that's sort of the best way to bat in those different situations. So do you think this is more a specific thing for batting in England?
Yeah, it is advantageous when it's in England because they can cater the pitches towards their style of cricket. I think that being said, there's examples all around the world of people who bat aggressively and have success. I think the example some commentators use is Virender Sehwag, Matthew Hayden, even Niroshan Dickwella, David Warner, even in Australia. And I think sometimes this England side's been criticised for lacking a bit of intent, particularly like when their opener's sole job was to hit centuries. I think people just want a little bit of intent and freedom, and sometimes you feel that even playing these shots, England are almost safer than just hanging in there and defending. And there's always that saying in, if you just block out and try and survive, that's not the point of the game. You've got to try and hit runs and take the game to the opposition. And even in today's cricket, when Dickwella started taking the game to Schwepson and line, it was a lot harder to hit the same lines and lengths. So while I think there's less certainty that it'll work all around, I think it is viable, and I don't think England will sort of change their game plan massively when they go around. Sure, maybe your stroke player's got to change on a spinning deck. You might use more sweeps, but I think this idea of batting with intent, taking the game to the opposition, playing on your terms, I think that'll hold true on most of the wickets.
Yeah, I'm going to build on this actually, just briefly. I think it is true that it will be somewhat dependent on conditions, but I don't think there's necessarily a massive advantage in it being on English pitches. Yes, they can be doctored, but I wouldn't say that it solely can work here. I mean, the three batsmen that Ethan cited were, who did we have? We had Sehwag, we had Warner, and who was the other player that you cited?
Hayden, Gilchrist.
Oh, and Matthew Hayden. If we look at those three, it is worth noting all three of those have terrible records in England and great records. Really, the place where aggressive and of has been in English conditions where the wicket has moved. So there's an argument to be had, if we can continue to perform in these conditions, maybe it will convert to other places. As Ethan brought up before, the most effective batsmen in this first day of the Sri Lanka test have been the ones that have attacked. Usman Khawaja's going at a strike rate, I think above 50, or at least thereabouts. Then you have Dickwella top scored for them and was probably the most aggressive batsman. There is a limitation to how much a side can sit in. I think it works with some great sit-in vibe. I don't think that's always the way to go. I think it might come unstuck on low wickets. I think Pakistan in October is going to be an interesting series for that. But any wicket where there's a little bit of pace or a little bit of turn and bounce, I think it probably works more often. We've won one test in our last 17, so clearly any more as well today takes us.
And just finally on it, do you think it is mainly just a way of thinking about the way that you construct your innings, or do you think it's particular shots that you play as well? What do you think in particular, like specifically, are the characteristics of this different style?
Well, I think it will be quite dependent on the individual. I think for some it's definitely shots, like a Ben Stokes dancing down the wicket, second ball and hitting southy over his head for 6 is clearly an attempt at a shot. But I don't think that's it. I think mindset is also quite important. I think mindset, we've seen that with quite a few players. I think the main reason for England's resurgence isn't some great change in technique. I think it is a mindset. Players generally bat better when they don't feel under pressure. And if you're constantly scoring runs and you're not looking to survive, you will naturally be more competent. The great batsmen in the world, you look at Kohli, Smith, Williamson, Root, Johnny Bairstow, you look at them and you have to say that what they do that others don't is probably they look for runs a lot more. A lot of the other test openers that have more average records and even middle order batsmen are looking to survive and grind out in innings. The batsmen that rotate the strike, the batsmen that attack more have, not just now, but historically been the most successful. Granted, that's in some cases a byproduct of the talent you have. But I do think a positive mindset goes a long way. And even, I mean, you look at McCullum was asked about Zach Crawley and how he's coaching him, and he told Crawley, play more shots. You're being too reserved, be more aggressive. That's not something that you'd necessarily expect of a player that hits 77 of 100 balls in a Sydney Ashes test. But I think the point that he's making is batsmen that are a bit more tentative, as Crawley has been in this series, will often leave the bat outside off stump. It's about being positive. If you're going to play at the ball, go at it. Not reckless. You've got runs to score. There's no real suggestion in world cricket that conditions actually are as big as they seem. I mean, you won't be playable. That's not actually true. The degree of seam and swing are the exact same, tentative when it's cloudy and a bit less tentative.
Yeah, it would definitely be an interesting few period of Test cricket going on, seeing how teams do try and take this on board, the success England's had in this new style of play. And leading on from that, we've also got a vox pop from Pearson here, who says that England will be the first team to score 500 runs in a day's play of cricket. So we'll defer to Ethan or Navod to work out the exact run rate that would require. But Pearson, I've got a new format here for the Vox Pop as well, Pearson. I've got a timer here, and you've got 45 seconds to make your call before we go to someone else. So take us away.
Okay, well, put simply, England at the minute score very, very quickly. There are few teams that have scored quicker than us in this series. That was the second fastest run rate in a series in the history of Test cricket. The only one that beats it was, funnily enough, Australia at home to the West Indies in 2015-16, when Voges hit all those double tons. They went at 4.54 for the series. And to get 500 in a day's play, you only need to go at 5.56, which is only a run per over more. That's no massive difference. I think you look at someone like Johnny Bairstow, who essentially played an ODI throughout that series. He faced 54 overs and hit 390 runs. If he comes off and you have Joe Root as an anchor, there's your runs. And that's my 45 seconds done.
Oh, very good. I accidentally put it in stopwatch instead of timer, so I didn't get it.
Fair enough.
But anyway, anyone want to respond to that?
Oh yeah, I'll have a go at that. I think first of all, hitting 500 is hard enough. Second of all, going an extra run and over is incredibly difficult, and maintaining an entire day at 5.56 runs and over is almost unheard of. I think like you can do it for a session when one player's in the zone, but to go for a whole day at just under 6 runs and over, you need multiple batsmen to do it, and it has to be the game style of multiple batsmen who have to be in form. Sure, Johnny Bairstow did it, but again, he'd have to hit like 200 in a day or something just to bring that into the equation. I think that's a very slim chance.
Well, surely you would look at the 2 fourth innings run chases of the last 2 games. We hit 300 in 50 overs, and we hit 200 we hit 300 again in about 54 overs. You put those together, and that's comfortably the run rate you need to hit 500 in a day. And
yeah, but you also made 300 in a fourth innings where New Zealand have to attack to stay in the series.
Well, that's not necessarily true of the second game, because they only had to draw the series to win the series, as you would say. So I don't think that's necessarily true. I agree they had to attack to an extent, but I think that was tactical failings. I think if you put England on flatter wickets than the ones we got here with a little bit more pace against a weaker team like a Bangladesh, I think they're the only side that will be willing to do this. I'm not saying it's certain that they will, but I think of all the sides in world cricket at the minute that really are out there that could hit the 500 total, I think England are the only ones that would ever be capable of doing it in a day because of the way they bat. And if the conditions are right, I don't think it's as implausible as some people will make out.
Well, I think you'd probably have to have about 6 Johnny Bairstows to be able to do that, not just the one. But
well, to be fair, Joe Root came in with 240 runs needed in that fourth innings of the last test, batted at 4.5 and over and still didn't hit 100. I mean, all that means is clearly we've done it we did it this series with an anchor. If you can do it with an anchor, then you can not need 6-7 Johnny Bairstows. I mean, you look at the way Stokes has batted this series. If he comes off once and hits 100, he could easily hit 100 off 50, 60 balls going by some of the shots he played this series. If you get him and Bairstow with a root anchor, I think it's doable. I don't necessarily think it's likely. I think of any side around at the minute that could do it, it's got to be England. We have the stroke players and potentially the pitchers to do it against weaker opposition.
Well, there you have it. We'll see if that does happen. You're definitely getting closer than any other team. I'll give you that. Anyway, before we move on from the England-New Zealand series, I just wanted to go through a few of the key issues that England had in the Ashes and get Pearson, but also Ethan and Navod's view on whether they've alleviated those problems to any real extent. So I think the first big one coming out of the Ashes was the openers for England. Obviously, Haseeb Hameed and Burns. Crawley was probably the best opener in the Ashes series in the couple of tests he did play. Pearson, do you think that you've had a breakthrough in the opening positions?
Well, but before we go too far into have we saved ourselves from the Ashes, I would bring up, we've played 3 tests. In the 3 tests after the Ashes before this, we did lose 1-0 to the West Indies. So I think it is very early days to say that all our problems are solved. But I do think we've improved. I think Alex Lees is the closest thing we've had in a while to someone that looks dependable, that has a background of blocking, so clearly has the defensive game, and with this mindset has been able to score runs. He batted slowly in the first test before clearly his mind shift was changed, so I'll disregard that. Second test, he batted excellently. He had a 40 and a 60 or so, I think, in his 2 innings, and set the tone. I think in the first over he faced in that 4th innings run chase, he cracked 2 brilliant boundaries to cover for 4. And I think that just set the tone. So I think he's definitely a find. I mean, even third test, yes, he failed twice. The first ball was unplayable from Trent Boult. I don't think anyone's laying a bet on that. And the next one he got burnt by Zach Crawley. Are we any closer to solving the second opener spot? Absolutely not. Everything we went on about how great Crawley was in the Ashes has pretty much come undone. I know Ricky Ponting said after his 77 that Crawley was guaranteed in the side for 2 years off that 1 innings. I'd be surprised if he lasts past the next test, so that's certainly not come true. But maybe we're a touch closer than we were, and it's being backed up by a middle order. But I do think there's a limitation to this Bazball thing with the top order, and possibly holding back a little bit more and taking more shine off it's the way to go. So is it solved? No. Are we closer? Yes, I think so.
Yeah, Crawley, 87 runs at an average of 14.5 and Lee's 169 runs at an average of 28.1. So I think that probably backs up what you were saying. Actually, Ethan, I'm just throwing it on the spot here. Well, or Navod, what would you say is the big thing out of the Ashes that had to be fixed up? And the next question for Pearson here.
I think it was just that they couldn't set the top order platform with those wickets, but I think the main thing was they couldn't capitalize when the conditions were good, particularly with Pope and Stokes at 5 and 6. But when it gets that period in Australia where things flat, but you'd say that issue's largely been fixed.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think it's too early to say definitively if this has been fixed. To really any question asked here. I think the game going back to the whole mentality thing, I think we looked scared at times during that Ashes series. A lot of players didn't really want to be there. I mean, Ollie Robinson was not fit for that series at the end. Well, not for the series. He was fine for some of the tests. For the 5th test, he clearly had issues. He wasn't fully fit, but he demanded selection over Craig Overton and got injured about 2 overs into his spell, and we didn't see him again. You look at Ollie Pope. Ollie Pope, after the 3rd test, tried to fly his Surrey batting coach all the way to Australia to get better advice because he didn't trust the England setup, and the England management didn't let him. All of these things suggest that there was a culture of a bit of nervousness in the England camp, and that we, even if we were in any sort of form with our batsmen, that we weren't going to be able to exploit it. I think you look at even something as basic as Hasib Hamid, because there was no time that he came out to bat in that series, except maybe the 1st test, where you thought he could impose danger on the Australians. Was basically impossible. We're now in a position where, irrespective if they actually do go on and do so, fans and the management alike seem to actually back the players. They think that we can chase 300 in the 4th innings. Maybe I don't, because I'm still a bit of a pessimist, but people even like neutrals like Ethan thought we would chase that score in the 4th innings of this test. So I think the mindset thing and actually having players being backed was something that just didn't happen in the Ashes. And what you call it, what series was that? Well, essentially to before McCullum was picked and after. I don't think we came any closer to solving it in that West Indies series. So I think all we've seen is it's been a McCullum-inspired change and a Stokes-inspired change. We've got what seems a better tactical captain and better motivational leader in charge with Ben Stokes, and a more impressive coach in Brendan McCullum, who can unite behind a vision in a way perhaps Root's unnerving nervousness and Chris Silverwood's lack of real vision couldn't.
And I think another point on backing players is, someone like Leach, he wasn't really supported by the England team at all before the Ashes, and, a little bit after that as well. But now you're seeing he took, I think, 10 for in that last test or something like that. And he's doing really well. You could say, English conditions, he's used to that. But, I think he bowled really, really well during this test series. So there's definitely a change in the spin department as well.
Yeah, that was the next point I was going to bring up. The lack of a spinner in Australia was a problem. And yeah, Leach has really resurrected his career. You think he can be the spinner going forward? Finally, I'll give you 20 seconds for this one, Pearson.
Yes. I mean, I've been an advocate of Parkinson for a while. I still think long-term he will be the spinning option. I think he's more of a wicket taker. And I don't want to get too much ahead of ourselves with Leach. He did take 2 wickets and go at 4.5 and over in the, in the 2nd test. So he was really on his last legs before he propped up with a 10 for. But he's definitely secured his spot for a while. And when he's trusted, he's very much a confidence player and seems to have improved. So he's not perfect, but stick with him for now. And he should be all right as a holding player that can take some wickets.
And now I like this new format we have for the Vox Pops. Them just popping up on my screen throughout the recording.
That's why they call them Vox Pops.
I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, they're really
okay.
Yeah, it's great. So this one's from Ethan here. You've said that you think that Zach Crawley will play the South Africa series, which is obviously the next home series for England at the end of their summer. So what's your thoughts on that? 45 seconds.
Well, he's the only England bat who's been underwhelming across that series, but I think will have enough faith in him to back him for the summer. I think if you're Brendan McCullum and you've been given the role and said that you'll give players almost too many games, I think it's a bit harsh to drop people even after 4 tests. I think it makes a lot more sense to just give him the entire summer, and then say after that, if he doesn't cut it, drop him from the squad and give him a couple of years at domestic level. As I think if it ends after 4 tests, he'll still be in the mix. And I think England always seem to cycle through their openers. So maybe something more definitive will be required.
Well, Pearson, I was saying partway through the last test that it would be the last game he ever plays for England. Oh, there goes a timer there. But then you reminded me of the India series, which is the India single test, which is coming up on Friday. So probably makes sense to play that. But surely he couldn't play. I hear what Ethan's saying, but surely you couldn't keep him in the team. Surely it's got to be a bad vibe to have someone in that horrible form still in the team for that long.
Well, I think there's definitely arguments for and against him being dropped. I think with this McCullum strategy, it will be backing players to the extreme, and backing players consistently would suggest that he probably gets more than 4 tests. I mean, we have at least seen after this test, McCullum came out and said Crawley's arguably one of our best match winners, which to an extent is true, but I don't think you can rely on a match winner under the impression that he will appear once every 5 to 10 tests and do something. I think arguably you'd say the first run of poor form that he got back through was his awful efforts in the county championship this season. We have players averaging 90 opening the batting in county cricket. I mean, he opens the batting with Ben Compton at Kent. Ben Compton has now crossed 1,000 runs this season. Zach Crawley hasn't hit 400. Zach Crawley averages 30. Ben Compton averages 90. The problem I think we will see here is Crawley doesn't have the numbers to back himself up now. Is even with those 77 he hit in Australia or the 267 that he hit in, in England against Pakistan, or the 100 he hit in the West Indies 3 months ago, he scores one great innings and then he disappears for a year. There is no top 6 batsman that's been given as many chances as him that's performed worse than him in the history of Test cricket. All that indicates to me is probably he doesn't deserve more chances. Maybe McCullum will back him for South Africa, but I think unless he scores runs in this India test, and that will need an impressive 60, 70, 80 plus score, possibly even 100, I don't see why he deserves to stay in the side. I think players like Compton have scored lots of runs. You look at someone like a Ben Duckett, if you want this aggressive style, is averaging 70 and striking at 75. There's no one really banging the door down, but there's enough players out there to suggest that you could replace someone in Crawley who's A, short on confidence, and B, probably doesn't have the technique to stand up for Test cricket.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. Nevada, I'll go to you for the final question on England. Just looking ahead to that single test against India. I know Pearson and I think Ethan actually are pretty bearish on how India are playing at the moment. They don't think they're that on the way down, potentially in a bit of a way. I'll be interested to get your views on how England will stack up against them and where India are at the moment.
Yeah, it'll be a very interesting one test game. I think India, they don't seem to be the same as well. A little bit rattled, especially as so long ago. But yeah, it'll be very interesting to see. I think there's a few questions over their form, especially with batting. So Rohit Sharma, against us in Sri Lanka didn't do quite well either. And we got absolutely pummeled that series. So there's a few questions over form. Shreyas Iyer should be hopefully one to look out for if he's playing, which I think he should be. But yeah, we'll see. Obviously, Virat Kohli hasn't done much in the last couple of years either. So it's just a question of form. I think India definitely feel like a weaker side than they were this time last year when we were doing the actual series that this test concludes. So it's a big question of form for India. I think England, with their current streak of form against New Zealand, having come off that series victory, the series whitewash, I'd say, is going to really propel them well for this test. But it'll be really interesting to see how India copes and whether they can sort of retain or find some of that form again.
Yeah, and Ethan, I think they had what you would have to call a bit of a near miss against Ireland. Is that going a bit far, maybe? But in their match against Ireland the other day, the Irish performed fairly well.
Yeah, sort of the A side T20 setup, playing a couple of games against Ireland. I mean, the first T20 was a 12-over game, which they chased down 108 in 9.2 overs. So it's relatively comfortable. And then the second game was the real interesting one. They batted best, made 225 off their 20 overs, and Ireland made 221. I believe they needed 7 off the last 3, and they only managed 3. But that's certainly a quality contest from Ireland to keep in the game. I think that the main takeaway for India is Deepak Hooda. He opened the batting in the first game and he batted 3 in the second game, and he managed 47 off 29 and 104 off 57. So he looks like he's in a bit of form. And Paul Sterling for Ireland still got the magic touch with a 40 off 18 to keep them in the game, but certainly entertaining cricket.
Yeah, I think Paul Sterling would have to be up there with Scott Edwards as the 2 most underrated batsmen in the world of cricket at the moment. But what kind of ground were they playing on with those kind of scores? It must have been an absolute postage stamp.
Yeah, Malahide in Dublin. So you know what to expect from the ground and from the commentators.
I don't think I've heard the commentators.
There's just like the one generic Irish commentator who is always there.
Oh, all right. Well, I might have to tune in next time they play a match. Well, I think that basically brings us to the end of the podcast today. Thank you guys for coming on, and goodbye, Pearson. Have a good trip to England.
Thank you. Hopefully, well, I'll feel bad if I have to miss a podcast after England beat India, particularly with my running, seemingly battle with some Indian fans on this podcast as I consistently trash Virat Kohli. But it should be a good test, and hopefully I get to watch it in England. I will be going to a one-day game, I believe, between England and India at the Oval. Hopefully that'll be a good contest.
Had to take out a loan to get there.
The English cricket has an affordability problem.
Had to send
television rights. Do that with attendance at the matches. They are outrageously overpriced, but you don't get the chance to watch cricket in England particularly often. So hopefully it'll be good.
You could probably do this off the podcast, but I will. So it was, a huge amount of money for the ticket. Was that just like the like an ordinary ticket? This wasn't like some second-hand thing that you bought. Like there were
this is through the Kia Oval cricket ticket office, and they're not the greatest seats in the ground, but they're good seats without being spectacular. It's just there's a tendency in England with cricket. It is a sport primarily followed by private school students by and large, or the elderly who have a bit more money to work with. And particularly in a place like Surrey, which is one of the wealthier pockets of England, I'd imagine on average wealth, it's probably the richest county. So they clearly feel they can overcharge. It's a very popular game at the minute with how England have been playing in white ball cricket. And will be the first series post Owen Morgan, who I know we've forgotten to mention this podcast, but well done to him. It's been a great career and sad to see him retire, but probably the right decision. So I guess they get good attendance. Supply and demand suggests costs should be high. I do think it's overpriced, but what can you do? I guess if you really want to watch cricket, you've got to stomach the fees.
Yeah, I think we need to get some price controls in there. But anyway, yes. Well, have a good time there, and Navod will be Navod's you're the 4th member of the podcast now anyway, but you'll have the license to talk as much as Pearson on the podcast while he's gone.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'll take all his talking time and replace it with my points.
Yeah, that's right. And you're not going anywhere, Ethan?
No, I'll just be sleeping and waking up in time for this podcast.
Oh, well, that's nice of you. And thank you all for listening. We will be back next week, sans Pearson. And goodbye.